Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, email us info@thatalks.com, or you can go to our website and contact us there via the contact tab. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, thank you all for tuning in again here this Easter Sunday, although I don't know if you're tuning in on Easter Sunday, but I'm certainly recording it this Easter Sunday. I done a great blot last week with some heathen friends of mine. We had a bit of mead out in the sunshine and toasted to the goddess of Ostara, which is really what the tradition of this season really is all about: the eggs, the bunnies. It's all about the birds and the bees coming out in the sunshine, coming back to us, laying ahead of us the summer to come. And obviously, I respect all traditions. I respect the Christian tradition as well. I'm not one of these heathens that has to lay into Christians every time the season comes. I think we can both share it in this day and age. No problem at all. So anyway, I hope you're all having a great Easter weekend out there. If you're listening to this when I publish it onto the website, which I'm sure you will because I'll get my arse in gear this evening. But this evening we won't actually be doing a talk on Easter or Ostara, which we do like to do sometimes on the actual seasons, get someone relevant for that subject, but we can't always do that. But we have actually got a fascinating guest lined up for today, courtesy of Tom Rosell, who's been on the show a few times. And thank you, Tom. It was a good recommendation from him, this wonderful guest. And I'm going to try and pronounce the name right. Dharma Pravartaka Acharya. I think that's right. And he is the Acharya of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. He's also a spiritual teacher, a Vedic scholar, a religious leader. He is widely renowned for his unapologetically authentic, traditional and fearless approach to teaching the spiritual truths of the Vedic tradition. Whether speaking to an audience of thousands or having a heartfelt discussion with only one person, Sri Acharya vividly conveys a deeply moving sense of personal compassion, peace, humanity and spiritual insight that has endeared him to thousands of students and admirers throughout the world. He is the real thing, and an enlightened and exceedingly qualified spiritual master. Well, I think we should crack on. Hi there, Acharya. Thank you for coming on the show.
Paul, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be on here with you.
Well, I've been looking through your website and I've done a bit of research on some of your work, and it's just, I mean, you really know your stuff. It's very fascinating. Right up our show's street. We like to touch on this stuff. You grew up in New York, and obviously with your interests in the Vedic spirituality. Could you tell us like how you come about it, like growing up in New York and then become so knowledgeable in that area? How did that happen?
Certainly. Well, yes, it's true. I was born in New York City. I was raised there essentially in the 70s and much of the 80s. And for myself, I guess it was a typical sort of search for truth. The only thing that was atypical was the fact that for me, it started off when I was very, very young. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, possibly 7 or 8 years old, when I first wanted to know what was the meaning of life. I had an experience of my own mortality that just got me thinking about this. Plus, all throughout my life, I always felt and really knew deep down within that this material realm was something that was temporary, that wasn't fully 100% real, and that wasn't really my home. So again, all of these things led to my beginning to search for truth. And then several years later, at the age of 10, I consciously decided to begin reading various scriptures of the world because I equated truth with God. I understood that, well, if I wanted to know truth, what did that mean? I didn't want to know truth half of the way or 99% of the way. I wanted to understand what is the highest objective, absolute philosophical truth about reality. So I knew that that meant I wanted to know God, even at the age of 10. So I began reading various scriptures. I read the Old Testament and New Testament. I read a version of the Quran. I read various Buddhist works, just different compilations of different sutras and Mahayana texts and Theravada texts. I read the Tao Te Ching, a little bit of Confucianism. I even tried reading some very serious German idealistic philosophy. I didn't get very deeply into that at the age of 10. I stopped that after a little while. But then finally, I read the Bhagavad Gita, which is, one could say, the primary scripture, or certainly the most well-known scripture of the Vedic tradition. And when I read the Bhagavad Gita at the age of 10, very specifically, it was at that point that I realized that I had found exactly what I was looking for. And again, what I was looking for was truth that philosophically oriented. And what I mean by that is truth that is not just a matter of mere opinion or speculation or, let's say, theological blind faith. I was looking for philosophy in the highest sense of that term, true eternal wisdom. And I found that in the Bhagavad Gita. And then from there, I began reading other Vedic texts, Upanishads, various different things. I began practicing yoga, meditation, pranayama, other sorts of yogic techniques like this. And then finally, I ended up becoming a monk for some time, for about 8 years. And yeah, that was how I began my search personally when I was living in New York as a youth.
Okay, I mean that's interesting stuff. What is if you were to, for our listeners now that may not know, not understand, what is Sanatana Dharma? Is that the correct pronunciation there?
Close, very close actually. It's Sanatana Dharma.
Right, thank you.
Sanatana Dharma, and yeah, the thing is, it's not your fault that you have a little difficulty pronouncing it. It's not a very well-known term. In fact, I am the person who began popularizing this term around 1988 or so, something like that. The other term that this religion is known by is Hinduism. That's the common term that people use. It's the Hindu tradition or Hinduism. However, I prefer the term Sanatana Dharma. Now, increasingly, more and more leaders of this tradition are using the term Sanatana Dharma because that's the actual name of the path. It's not Hinduism. Hinduism is a made-up word that's only a few hundred years old.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I mean, the word Hindu you will not even find in any of the so-called Hindu scriptures. The word does not exist. It's a very modern word that originated with the Persians, and then the British took it up during the very start of the Raj for census purposes. But the word Hindu has nothing to do with this path. The actual name is Sanatana Dharma, and followers of Sanatana Dharma are simply called Dharmis. But as far as what the term actually means, it's very difficult to translate in English, but I have translated it as the eternal natural way. So the term Sanatana means that which is eternal, and the word Dharma means the natural way. And if you'll indulge me for just a few moments, let me explain a little bit more in depth the profundity of this term Dharma.
Please do. Yeah.
Because, of course, yes, many people have heard this term. You know, I'm sure everyone in your audience has heard the term Dharma before. Unfortunately, most likely, they probably connected to Buddhism specifically, not understanding that Buddhism itself is a rather recent religion, around 2,500 years old, that itself was born as an offshoot of Sanatana Dharma. So the term Dharma is actually Vedic. It goes back way before Buddhism. And what the word Dharma means is essentially natural law, the idea that when we look at the universe around us, we see a universe that has order to it, even with the seeming chaos. the chaos is on the surface level only. The chaos is what we see through the empirical senses. But the truth of the matter is, when deep in meditation, in calm, in openness, when we open ourselves to the whisperings of nature and the cosmic order, what we begin to see is that, no, there are actual natural laws that are there, that are discernible, that we can actually know. And when in accordance with these natural laws, what we have is we have prosperity, we have health, we have happiness, joy, we have meaning in life. And then when dharma or natural law is followed on a larger scale by society, what we then have is a true civilization, a civilization that is based upon natural law, and a civilization in which the citizens of that civilization have true joy and growth and happiness. So that essentially is what Sanatana Dharma means, the eternal natural way. And that's the name of the path that I have followed for almost all of my life and that I teach now.
Right. I mean, with regards to scripture, I mean, there's we cover a lot of paganism on this show, and I'm a pagan myself. I follow I try to be an Odinist, and this is my point. A lot of pagan scripture is missing so much because of obviously other religions coming in and taking over. What with regards to your religion, Sanatana Dharma, do you have a complete scripture, or have you had to piece it together through various traditions yourself, or are you lucky enough to actually have it all as one body?
Excellent question. And let me first answer the second part, and then actually, if you don't mind, I would like to address paganism a little bit.
Yeah.
But first, let me address the actual question about scriptures. Yes, in Sanatana Dharma, we are exceedingly fortunate that we have the vast majority of our scriptures intact. We've lost a little bit, but very little. The truth of the matter is the Vedic scriptures, when you talk about the Vedic scriptures, you're talking about truly a vast library of literature, and so vast to the point where if you had 8 hours a day to do nothing but read, and you wanted to read the totality of the Vedic scriptures, it might take you half your life. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a vast library of books. And more than that, the Vedic scriptures are indeed the authoritative foundation for everything that we know, for everything that we believe, for everything that we do. If one is a follower of the Vedic tradition, then that means you follow the Veda, and the Veda meaning the scriptures. That's the actual name of our scriptures, is simply Veda. Veda means knowledge. Now, if you don't mind, I want to address what you said about paganism, because this is actually something that I've written about very extensively in quite a few of my books, actually. I have about a dozen books out now. When it comes to what today is called paganism, or what I like to call pre-Christian European spirituality, interestingly, I see traditional European spirituality and Sanatana Dharma as being in many ways synonymous. I've actually called them not only twin religious traditions, not only sister religions, but twin sister religions. That's what I've actually called them. And it's very unfortunate, however, that yes, due to the artificial imposition of Abrahamism, to state it very bluntly, that is especially the Judeo-Christian, but also Islamic traditions upon traditional Europe, much of the knowledge and practices of traditional European spirituality is lost.
Absolutely.
And that purposefully so. What books that existed were burnt. Many of the priests, priestesses were killed. Many of the sacred grottos and groves and temples were destroyed and churches built on top of them. And it's horrific. It's a horrific history. Again, I see these religions of ancient Europe as being, in my mind, an extension of Vedic spirituality. So whenever I look into the history of this tragedy that happened, I mourn whenever I think about this. But yes, we know for a fact that the ancient European peoples had their own Vedas. They had their own oral traditional scriptures that were carried down, again, orally. We know this is the case with the Druids, for example. They had massive books of sacred poetry, of sacred hymns. But unfortunately, they had these books orally. They had them memorized. So now they are 100% lost. So when it comes to paganism, unfortunately, I know many of the most important, let's say, pagan reconstructionists in Europe and America, and they know me, and we've discussed this endlessly for a very long time. They themselves will be the first people to admit that while they will continue to attempt to reconstruct, let's say, ancient Nordic religion, ancient Celtic religion, et cetera, it can never be reconstructed, unfortunately. Too much has been lost.
Yeah.
Too much has been lost. And this is why, interestingly, and I don't know how much of your audience knows this, as a result, many of these leaders in the pagan community have turned to Vedic spirituality to help fill in the gap.
Yeah.
Both as far as knowledge, but also as far as practice as well. And in fact, in many ways, not very known to the public, I've helped many of these people to do this, and specifically with philosophy and ritual. So paganism, let's say, and Sanatana Dharma, in my mind, are synonymous. They are the same thing.
Right. Okay. So you would advise that then? You'd advise an Odinist or someone that's into Asatru, the Norse tradition. You'd say, well, research that tradition and then turn to the Vedic scriptures, and then you can kind of get a broader perspective on it, because it's kind of like it's sister or brother scripture, so to speak. You would actually advise that, would you?
Absolutely, yes. What I would tell the followers of any ancient European religion, whether it's Asatru, Greco-Roman, etc., is number one, absolutely do your best to reconstruct what you can.
Yeah.
What was destroyed by, again, Christian missionaries and Abrahamists in general. Try your best to reconstruct what you can. Unfortunately, it's inevitable that what you will end up with will be whatever, 5%, 10% of what actually was there. For the rest, please come to the Vedic tradition and get the rest from there, because it's the same.
Yeah.
The Vedic tradition essentially are the guardians of the philosophy and the practice of the ancient European religions that has been lost on the continent of Europe. We have it.
So this all come from the Indo-Europeans when it was like that long ago? You think maybe the Vedic scripture is basically what was, and then eventually branched off into several different religions, the Celtic religion, the Norse religion, and then obviously the Indian religion. They all took different directions from this same scripture, or do you think it was something that existed even before the Vedic scripture?
I would say the former, not the latter, because there really is nothing before the Vedic scripture. I mean, there's no evidence of that. The Vedic scriptures are recognized by pretty much every scholar on earth as the most ancient extant writings on earth. So there's no real evidence that there was anything before the Vedic scriptures. But yes, I would say that essentially all of these other, let's say, subgroups were in one way or another following Vedic spirituality. And the further back you go, the more pronounced that was the case. Of course, as time goes on, they begin to become separated more and more and more. But again, historically, and as a scholar myself, I've seen that the further you go back in looking at history, the closer to the pure Vedic things were. Right,
yeah. Well, yeah, I share what you mean when you say it's it's upsetting in a way, because you read some of this. I've read so much books on Norse mythology and the Germanic paganism, and there just seems to be such depth there but you just can't see it all. You just know it's there, but you can't see it, and it is frustrating. So this is inspiring for me, because I think what you're saying does make a sense to my position in that the Vedic scriptures certainly can fill in there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yourself and so many others intuitively, when they look at ancient European religions, they get the exact intuitive feeling that you have.
Yeah.
They know there's so much more there, but it's just hidden in mystery, because again, it was destroyed by Christian priests, by just terrible people who wanted to stamp it out. But intuitively, people know there is something of tremendous importance that's there. But the frustration is, again, they cannot reconstruct it. What can you do when, in some cases, 98 and 97% of a spiritual tradition was purposefully destroyed?
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's a travesty.
Yeah, so going on to, you're I understand it. You're European, of ethnicity as European. I think I heard you. Was it half Italian? I remember hearing in another interview,
Right. Half Italian, half Spanish.
That's right. Yeah.
100% European, genetically, but born in America, born in New York.
Okay, so I mean, where do you stand in terms of the universalist perspective on religion as a gender? Because obviously, I mean, we've got certain faiths that are kind of the ethnic faiths of certain peoples. Sometimes people regard this as very controversial. They don't like it. Other people don't see anything wrong with it. And then it brings us back to the whole thing, the universal take on religion. Is religion universal, or is there is there meaning to having certain faiths that are separate and mean different things to different people? Is that relevant? Where do you sit with that?
Sure. Well, that's a good question. It's a very deep philosophical question.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wrote an entire book just about this topic that is called Radical Universalism.
Right.
And the approach that I take is itself a radically traditionalist approach. And when I say radically traditionalist, I mean traditionalist with a small t. Not so much in keeping with, let's say, René Guénon or Julius Evola, but traditionalist meaning this is essentially what all the religions of the past taught. And that is this, that the reason why there are different religions is because there are different people. Now, that being the case, we know that people are in different places in their lives. Some people are very good. Some people are very evil. Some people are very sincerely searching for truth. Some people practice so-called spirituality, religion, more for materialistic reasons, egotistical reasons, etc. So seeing this diversity in human beings, we can understand that, of course, there's going to be diversity in religion. At the same time, however, understanding the fact of this diversity in religion, it would be an illogical leap to then say that, well, all religions then are exactly the same. It doesn't matter what religion you practice. It doesn't matter what you believe. Ultimately, we end up in the same place anyway. This is, to say the very least, one of the most tremendous illogical leaps that a person can take. That would be akin to saying, well, if you look at the diversity of human beings, everything that everyone does is acceptable. Well, we know that's not the case. We know that we can make distinction between the serial killer versus the saint. There is tremendous diversity among humans, and we cannot take a philosophically or ethically relativist sort of approach to this. Well, in the same way, there are many religions in the world. Some of them veer more toward truth than others. Some of them veer tremendously toward untruth. And I'm one person who has no difficulty in saying that some of the religions that are existing in the world today are purely evil, and they have to be accepted as such. If you have a doctrine that encourages you, for example, to kill and murder people, to destroy civilizations en masse in the name of your God, then you're practicing a demonic religion. And we can't say that that religion is the same as a religion that encourages you, for example, to live in accordance with natural law, to live a peaceful existence, an existence of wisdom in which you try in a very rational way to understand truth and to have compassion toward others. You cannot equate the two. You cannot equate the two. And to try to do so is illogical. Again, it would be kind of like trying to equate the serial killer with a saint. It can't be done. So I am not a universalist in this sense, in the idea that, oh, yes, it doesn't matter what religion you follow, it's all good. You see, philosophically, the moment that you say X doesn't matter, you're no longer being rational. You're no longer dealing in a philosophical terrain. It does matter. Everything matters. What your view of self is matters. What your view of the divine is matters. What your view of ethics is matters. What your view of God is matters. It all matters. So yes, I am not a radical universalist, meaning someone who believes that all religions are the same. They are not.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like sometimes the way people's attitude, and I'm not saying that, I mean, I know there are some Odinists out there that have got a chip on their shoulder and they go a bit too far with the old racist thing, and like that does exist and it's there. But at the same time, I think that the reaction to the from the universalist perspective can sometimes almost like carrying on attacking the religion like it did in the first place. Why there's so little scripture there for us to research. It's almost like people are still going against it, and there's nothing wrong with a people having a religion that's close to their roots and who they are as human beings. You know, it seems very strange that people take that view, that it's offensive and like you're not including other people, where religion is just a personal thing anyway. You don't have to include everyone into your circle in a religious way. You can still be friends with and still have your own religion, you know?
Oh, absolutely. No, this is a tremendous hypocrisy on the part of many individuals who want to deny, let's say, for example, just to pick an example, who want to deny followers of a Satru the ability to follow their ancestral religion. This is absolute hypocrisy on their part. You know, we understand that everyone has an ethnic background, and people are allowed to celebrate that ethnic background. If your ethnic background has a certain kind of food, like, for example, again, I'm half Italian. I love Italian food. Is there something wrong with me that I like Italian food, having been born half Italian? Of course not. You know, when it comes to culture, people are more understanding. Culture, food, how people dress. But then when it comes to religion, people want to say, oh, no, you can't follow your own ethnic religion, unless, of course, you're one of the protected classes. Then you're expected to.
Yeah.
You see, that's where the hypocrisy comes in, and that's part two. Yeah. You see, if you are one of the protected classes under, you know, what is now the prevailing, let's say, ideological dogma of whether you want to call it political correctness or cultural Marxism, liberalism, whatever you want to call it. If you are one of the protected classes, then not only are you allowed to practice your ethnic religion, you are encouraged to, you are almost paid to, depending on what nation you live in,
yeah,
what
absolutely.
European nation you live in. So this is the hypocrisy. But then if there's a person who is of Germanic origin and they want to follow a Satru, or there is a person who is Irish, let's say, you know, or British, and they want to follow the ancient Celtic religion, oh, now suddenly you're a bigot. Well, that's hypocrisy. That's a double standard that anyone with an IQ above 70 would see as ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you get people, especially women, I think, although some may disagree listening, but I think they tend to warm to the universalist side of things because because there's less threat, because there's less, putting you on the spot, so to speak, whereas you've almost got to be a bit brave now to do it for us or Odinists. You've got to sort of got past that kind of, you don't care what people think, you're just going to go and do it. But not everyone wants that confrontation. They want a simple life. So they kind of go with the universalist thing. But to tie this on to another point, which I think is maybe related to the philosophy behind universalism, is of course monotheism. And is there at all anything monotheistic about the Vedic scripture and Sanatana Dharma? Is there a monotheistic element to it?
Well, yes and no. Again, as with so many philosophical topics, it's important to understand these things in a nuanced sort of way. Ultimately, Sanatana Dharma is monotheistic. However, in a way that is radically different from, let's say, Abrahamic monotheism. And let me explain the difference between the two. With Abrahamic monotheism, this is what I personally philosophically call an anthropomorphic monotheism. And that is the idea that there is one ultimate God, but that God is really very human in his behavior, is very petty, essentially the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Quran. This is a God which really reflects human beings rather than the other way around. This is a God that expects his followers to wage war in his name, and religious wars specifically, wars of religious conquest. This is, in fact, I'm not the first person to note this, this is one of the foundational bases of Abrahamism. The idea of waging religious war. That is, we're going to attack these other people because they have a different religion, and we are going to kill them if they don't convert. This is something that is purely Abrahamic. This is something that belongs within the realms of Judaism, mainstream Christianity throughout the last 2,000 years, and Islam. This is not something that's found in any other religion on earth. And it's important for people to know this. When it comes to any of the dharmic religions, and let me make this clear, when I say dharmic, I mean not just Vedic, Buddhist, Jain, I also mean the European religions. So within the Dharmic realm, that is the realm of those religions that followed natural law, there has never been religious warfare. There's been warfare, but never this idea that, oh, we are going to conquer these people with the sole purpose of converting them to worship of our God, and if they don't, we will kill them. That never existed outside of the Abrahamic religions.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and I'm sorry. Can you remind me of the rest of your question?
Well, it was kind of like a general question. I mean, it's on monotheism, just the nature.
Oh yes. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, just to finish that up.
Yeah.
With Vedic spirituality, on the other hand, we follow what is called panentheistic, not pantheistic, but entheistic monotheism. That is ultimately, of course, yes, we believe that there is one absolute, one spiritual absolute, one divine. Philosophically necessary, there has to be. Otherwise, the absolute would be divided against itself, which philosophically is unsustainable. However, we believe that this one absolute is omnipresent. In other words, God is present everywhere. God is present in creation. God is present within nature. God is present within us. God is present in everything, to the point where anything that exists has its existence secured by the very presence of the divine itself. That's the first thing. Second thing is the concept of God as exists in Sanatana Dharma is very much literally the opposite of the Old Testament God. The God worship is a God of pure love. In fact, the source of all love, the source of all beauty, the source of all good, of all wisdom, etc. And the God who we worship does not ask us to kill other people in his name, ever.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, with regards to deity, with obviously polytheism, you have lots of different deities. Would you say they're just expressions of that one God, or are they creations of it? I suppose
they are creations.
The same thing, but
yeah, they are creations. And it's interesting. A lot of people will ask about this because, of course, in the Vedic tradition, we know that, yes, there are multiple divinities, and this leads to a lot of confusion on the part of many people, actually. Even people who I know who are scholars are still confused about this to this day, even professors of religious studies. Yeah, when you look at the Vedic tradition, yes, you'll see multiple gods and goddesses. However, the idea is that these gods and goddesses, they are all real. There is a personification of everything. There is a god of the sun. There is a god of the moon. There is a goddess of the planet Earth. Her name is Bhumi Devi. These are all very real beings. They actually exist as personalities as much as you and I. However, even though they are much more advanced, much higher than we are spiritually and as far as their power, they're all considered to be servants of the one divine, of the one. To state it in terms of Plotinus, they are all servants of the one. They're not so much expressions of him, to some limited degree. We all are, really. Nature is, for that matter. But they are considered to be servants of the one God. So this is how we reconcile polytheism with a healthy monotheism.
Right. Okay. No, fascinating stuff. Let's move on, because I know, is there any link with Sanatana Dharma and yoga, for example? Because I know yoga over the last 100 or so years has obviously come into the West an awful lot. I mean, do you think that would have been something that our pagan ancestors here in Europe would have been doing, and has it been a part of Sanatana Dharma for as long as it's been around, so to say?
Sure. Actually, the yoga tradition, the authentic yoga tradition, this is separate from, let's say, modern American New Age commercial yoga, which is garbage. But the actual yoga tradition and Sanatana Dharma are synonymous. They're the same thing. The two are almost interchangeable. In fact, one could say that what yoga is Sanatana Dharma or Vedic spirituality in practical application. In other words, if a person wants to know, all right, how do I practice this path known as Sanatana Dharma? The answer would be, well, you practice yoga. But again, yoga in the authentic sense, not just this more modern, new age, wishy-washy sort of yoga. We're talking about yoga as a very serious spiritual discipline, that has many, many different sciences and arts to it. And as far as the European connections to yoga, oh yes, yeah, we know that people in the ancient past in European history practiced yoga. I mean, we have various representations, various images going back thousands of years, pre-Christian, where we see different individuals in Nordic lands, for example, in recognizable yoga positions, in yoga asanas, doing meditation, etc. We've seen depictions of even the goddess Lakshmi and other Vedic deities found historically throughout the history of Europe. So yes, we know that ancient Europeans practiced various forms of yoga, especially meditation specifically. We know that in the writings that do exist, which are primarily the Greco-Roman writings, these are the most ancient writings that still exist in Europe. The philosophical concepts are very similar to the yoga tradition, where people like Plotinus, for example, talk about meditation. And meditation is itself the very heart of yoga. So again, these links are undeniable.
Right. Okay. I mean, going back a little bit to the Universalist thing. I mean, you're as I said before, you're European. You've a scholar now in the Vedic scripture. How do you see yourself then? I mean, going back to the ethnic side of it, are you just looking at it as the fact that it's so old, and as you said before, that it's basically just the roots of what they're all about, or do you feel that you've had to kind of adopt Indian culture into your life to indulge in it? Just tell us a little bit about how your perspective of how you feel from your perspective.
Sure, definitely. So kind of how I negotiate these two things, being a European American on the one hand, but practicing Vedic spirituality on the other. Sure. Yeah, for myself, again, I see myself as 100% European American. I'm not Indian. And interestingly, I don't see the practice of Sanatana Dharma as being tied to India in any way whatsoever. I mean, I've been there. I visited there twice for long periods of time. I lived in my guru's ashram in India several times before he passed away. Very often, I love Indian food. I won't lie. I love Indian food. I love anything spicy, for that matter. For that matter, I love Vietnamese and Mexican food. But at the same time, I don't try to pretend that I'm Indian. I'm not. And neither should I have to pretend that I'm Indian in order to follow the Vedic tradition. And for myself and my students, I tell all of my students throughout the world who are not Indian, I do have Indian students. I have quite a few, actually. But for the ones who are not Indian, I tell them, no, don't try to pretend that you're Indian. You don't need to. On the contrary, whatever you are, if you're British, if you're if you're Russian, if you're Canadian, if you're Swedish, continue to be what you are. Think as a Swedish person or Russian or whatever, dress in that way, act in that way, but spiritually, within your heart, follow Sanatana Dharma. And that's what I do. So, for example, when I'm teaching in a very formal religious context, yes, I will dress in what people would call Indian garb. I don't consider it Indian. I just consider it to be ancient. But then day-to-day life, I dress impeccably as a European American. I'll wear shirts, slacks. I'll wear a suit, tie. If anything, I try to look my best as a European American. So yes, I don't think it's necessary at all to, let's say, try to mimic being Indian just because you're following Sanatana Dharma. And again, it would be silly to do so since Sanatana Dharma is not Indian anyway. It's a tradition that was followed by the majority of the planet several thousand years ago.
So yeah, fascinating. So I mean, and where does it lead? Where is the? I mean, obviously we look at the Christian text, the Bible. It tells us the end goal of where we should go, where we shouldn't go. Do we have that with the Vedic scripture? Do we have that there? Do we have a message or an end plan, so to speak?
Sure. So let's say kind of like an idea of salvation. Is that what you're asking about? What is the ultimate goal?
Yeah.
Sure. There absolutely is an ultimate goal of not just the Vedic tradition, but human life. And that is, one could say, self-realization, liberation. In the Vedic tradition specifically, in the smallest of nutshells, because you can imagine this topic alone is something we could talk about for hours.
Yeah.
But in the smallest of nutshells, this is the idea that for the vast, vast majority of human beings, where we currently find ourselves is in a place of illusion. We find ourselves essentially covered by something that is artificial, and that is ego, false ego. You know, this artificial sort of sense of self that has been imposed upon us by society, by our parents, by our culture, by our own illusions, by our own uncontrolled desires. So the vast majority of people are living in illusion, are living in a lie, essentially. And this is why we suffer. The reason why we suffer, especially internally, more so than externally, especially psychologically, inwardly, the reason why so many people experience depression and confusion in their lives and anxiety, etc., is because we are not living as our true selves. Well, the goal of Sanatana Dharma is to rid ourselves of all illusion. And when I say all, I mean ultimately it has to be all, 100% of illusion must be eliminated. And we must embrace our true self. And that means our inner self, our soul, our spirit, you know, whatever you wish to call it, our consciousness. That aspect of ourselves that is truly eternal, and that is the true us. When we do this fully, we then have achieved the goal of life, which in English would be called liberation or salvation. At that point, we have self-realization. We know who and what we are, and then we can live a life of peace. We can live a life of wisdom, of nobility, of goodness, a life in which in every way we are fulfilled. And that is the goal, is to achieve this sort of liberation from illusion.
Right. No, very interesting. I'd like to obviously go into a good source for research for a lot of this stuff if anyone wants to really get into it, and obviously including your own work and your own books. Before we go there, just like to, I mean, obviously in the West at the moment, we're having a lot of, and it's built up over the last 100 years, a lot of occult researchers, people like Aleister Crowley and other people writing books on magic and occult. In the modern times, we've got chaos magic. We've got a lot of teenagers out there really getting into just magic and occult, universal tricks, if you like. What's your views on magic, occult magic, and can you incorporate that into Sanatana Dharma?
Sure.
Sanatana Dharma.
This is kind of a tricky question. This is the reason why. When you use the term occult, of course, this is a very general term, and it includes everything. It includes very positive things, very negative things. It includes very creative, but also very destructive things. It includes things that are very beneficial as well as things that are very, very harmful. So this is why we have to, of course, discern what we mean by occult or magic. And when it comes to the Western occult tradition specifically, this gets back to the same problem that we were speaking about when it comes to paganism, when it comes to pre-Christian European religion, as people are attempting to reconstruct it today, is that when it comes to the occult tradition, and I'm going to state this very bluntly, a lot of your audience probably won't like this, but none of them can refute it, guaranteed. And that is this. It is a system that is predicated upon broken traditions. And there's no way around this. Of course, people will attempt to say, well, of course, I'm following some tradition that's been hidden for 2,000 years and, you know, was just underground. And, you know, all evidence shows that such claims are almost always made up. There's zero proof of this. Unfortunately, as with the pagan traditions, much of the original knowledge of occult sciences that were practiced in Europe, let's say 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they are lost. They are lost. So as a result, what do we find? We find individuals in the past several hundred years, since approximately the Renaissance, who, again, have tried to fill that knowledge gap. Unfortunately, a lot of it was filled with things that were made up, with just speculative nonsense, things that are not based on any actual authority or tradition that goes back thousands of years, or in some cases, they tried to fill that gap by quite literally stealing from the Vedic tradition, which is what, unfortunately, many of the developers of the modern magical tradition, including Aleister Crowley, did. They basically just stole their stuff or they made it up. And we need to be very honest about this. If we are claiming to practice spirituality, but we're not willing to be honest about what we are doing, then we're practicing nothing. We're not practicing spirituality in any form. So this is what I would say to people is, number one, when it comes to the modern occult or magical traditions, first follow something that is positive, not something that is dark or evil or meant to harm others, not something that is meant to fuel illusion and false ego rather than do its opposite. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when it comes to this knowledge gap, I will give the same answer that I would to individuals who are very courageously trying to reconstruct the pagan tradition. And that is this: when it comes to the knowledge gap, don't make things up. Don't make things up and don't steal. Rather, very honestly, turn to the most ancient spiritual tradition on the face of the earth. And that is Sanatana Dharma. That is the Vedic tradition. If you look at the Vedic tradition, there are quote unquote occult practices that are mind-boggling in comparison to modern concoctions that are actually based on ancient philosophies and practices that truly go back beyond what we call history. Yeah. So this is what I would recommend to people.
Right.
Is that they try to truly follow something positive and authentic, and when there is a knowledge gap, don't just make things up. Go to the Vedic tradition. You'll find the knowledge that you're looking for there.
Would you say that things like the Tree of Life in the Western Kabbalah, which is fairly recent in terms of how old the Kabbalah is generally within the Judaic tradition, would you say, I've often thought that maybe that tradition has borrowed itself from a lot of the European ideas and hidden pagan traditions. And what are your views on the Kabbalah itself? Do you think it may have borrowed itself from the Vedic scripts at some stage? Vedic scripts?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I have a PhD in religious studies. I've studied pretty much all the religions in the world and their historic origins, including Judaism and the Kabbalah. And the truth of the matter is, it is something that is self-admitted on the part of followers of Judaism, that they took all of the best elements of what they now call Judaism from Europe. So, for example, philosophy. There was not philosophy in Judaism up until, I believe, the 1st century BC. Same thing with so-called Jewish mysticism. Yeah, the Kabbalah is 100% borrowed from European paganism, from Gnosticism, but also going back to earlier historical strata from the Vedic tradition as well. So again, when it comes to Kabbalah, it's all borrowed anyway. So why not go to the origin? Why not actually go to these ancient sources that the Kabbalists, who really only go back to the early medieval ages, why not go to the original sources? Why read a book about a book when you can read the original book?
Brilliant, yeah. And that brings us onto your books and any, if you were to advise, if someone's listening now, particularly maybe an Odinist that's thinking, this is great, this is inspiring, what books would you advise, and obviously which one would suit them of your own?
Sure. Well, again, I've written about a dozen books, but there are two that I would definitely recommend. The first of these is a book that is called Sanatana Dharma, The Eternal Natural Way. And that's available on Amazon, but it's also available on our website, dharmacentral.com, which is our primary website. We have many, actually, because we have a very large movement, global movement. But go to dharmacentral.com. They can find that book, Sanatana Dharma, The Eternal Natural Way. Another book that I know many Odinists would be extremely inspired by, and I know because Odinists seem to be the biggest audience for this second book, that is the Dharma Manifesto. The Dharma Manifesto is a book that I wrote in 2013, and it is a political manifesto based upon these very ancient ideas of Dharma. And I even talk about Odinism within it. I talk about Asatru, and I show some of the connections that are there between Asatru and Vedic spirituality. But especially if people want to understand how this tradition of Sanatana Dharma applies to our day and age in an extremely practical way. That is, politically, economically, socially, philosophically, etc. The Dharma Manifesto is a very good book to read. I'd say from what I've heard from my readers who have gotten back to me, it seems like half the audience for that book are followers of Asatru, who absolutely love the Dharma Manifesto, which kind of surprises me because Asatru people were not my main audience in writing the book, actually, but they ended up being the main audience. Right. And again, I think it's because they just see so much of what they believe in the book. Yeah. And that book was published by Arctos, and it also is available everywhere. It's available through their website, on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. But again, if they go to dharmacentral.com, they can find it there as well.
Right, and lastly, the International Sanatana Dharma Society. Tell us just a little bit about that before we wrap it up.
Sure. Well, that is the primary organization that I am the leader of. It's a religious nonprofit. Everything that I do is nonprofit. I quite literally don't make a penny on anything that I do, including, interestingly, the books I sell. As soon as I write a book, the copyright goes to our nonprofit. So I literally don't even make a penny on our books. But the International Sanatana Dharma Society is our let's say, spiritual movement. It is something that is worldwide. We have branches throughout the world, but it's based in America. And essentially, if an individual finds themselves attracted to what we've been talking about today, to the Vedic tradition, to Dharma, and they want to begin going much deeper in their understanding of it, but also in their practice of it, that is why we have this movement, the International Sanatana Dharma Society. I would suggest that they contact us through dharmacentral.com and let us know that they want to very sincerely learn more, and they can become involved in this movement. As far as the movement itself, the movement has one goal, and that is to state it very bluntly, to change the entire face of the earth, to bring the world back to a natural order. Right. That is the goal of the movement, and to do so spiritually, politically, economically, culturally, in every single field of human endeavor. We want to bring about another golden age in which people abandon the excesses and the degeneracy of modernity, and they begin to re-embrace the glory of what once was thousands of years ago in Europe and throughout the rest of the civilized world at that time. That's the goal. And that's our movement.
Right. No, that sounds great. It's been brilliant having you on, Acharya. We really appreciate it. It'd be fantastic for you to come back on at some point in the future, because we could probably go on for another hour with all this stuff, because it's fascinating and it's very new to me as well. So it's I've really enjoyed this show, even that bit more because of that. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners before we wrap it up? Any more information or any contact details or whatnot?
Well, first of all, again, Paul, let me thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
I've been interviewed by many people in the past, and let me tell you, you have done an absolutely wonderful job. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for your kind words. It would be my pleasure at some point to come back on again if you'd like me to, and if your audience would like. As far as last words, let me just say this very quickly to your audience, and that is this. Those intelligent and sincere individuals in your audience who intuitively know that our world is in tremendous trouble for a variety of reasons, and who want to indeed bring about a new golden age, let me just tell everyone in your audience to not lose hope, and to know that not only can that happen, it is going to happen, and is going to happen in our lifetimes. So I ask everyone in your audience to please hold on to that hope, and not just hope, but continue to work hard in any field of life that you find yourself in right now to help bring this about, this new golden age.
I think that's a very much needed message there, and certainly inspires me, and I'm sure it inspires a lot of our listeners listening now. It's been fantastic, Acharya. I'll certainly check out your work, and please keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sri Dharma Pravartaka Acharya. Fascinating stuff. I hope I got that right again. I apologise if I was stuttering and fluffing around with some of the words there. It is actually all quite new to me, this stuff. I'm quite familiar with the Hindu tradition and the basic bits and pieces, but going deep into that, I was struggling a bit in here and there. And I want to research it more because it's fascinating stuff. And I've got the feeling if you're on the same page as me, I think there's a few of you out there that are probably thinking the same thing because it's just very interesting, very interesting. So anyone that does want, the website is dharmacentral.com, DharmaCentral.com. Please go and check it out. Yeah, so that's that one, and we've got plenty of other really cool shows coming up. We've got I've managed to get a socialist activist that I wanted to get on. In fact, I should have already done that show, but we had internet problems, and so that's been rescheduled, but that's coming up. And we've obviously also got David Parry coming on the show for his show to do a talk on the Church of Antioch, going way, way, way back to the beginning of Christianity there. The other side of what we've been talking about today, perhaps. But so we've got plenty of good stuff coming up. I hope you did enjoy Shana and Stephanie's show that they done with Mary Rodwell. It's done pretty well. A lot of people listening to it. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of what the girls are going to do there, because that's a nice idea we've got here to put on the show. And I'm sure they're going to knock out some really good shows in the future. So I think that is where we're going to wrap it up. Please keep linking the show, keep telling your friends about the show, and more importantly, keep downloading the show. We do appreciate it. So until the next time, stay strong, stay brave, keep doing your thing, and keep tuning in. We're going to be looking forward to the next time. Till then, bye.